Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oh, is this one on? Yes. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address the two-track justice system here in the United States. If you're part of the Democrat-sponsored Democrat terrorist organizations BLM and Antifa, you can burn down American cities for an entire year, get bailed out of jail, and face no investigation or commission from Congress. Meanwhile, if you're a Trump supporter who happened to be at the Capitol on January 6th, you face exorbitant bail, solitary confinement, abusive jail guards, and no due process. This is an outrage. Just today, just this week, Congress told all of the American citizens that Congress cares more about Congress than the American people. After all, we have witnessed American cities all over our country be victims to violent riots by domestic terrorists all over this country. The people have endured this. Businesses have been destroyed. Violence has happened. Police officers, night after night, have been abused, have had to endure these violence, riots, attacks, on and on. But yet this institution has been focused on itself and focused on investigating January 6th, even though there are many investigations already happening here through the Senate and the House committees. There have already been over 445 people arrested from January 6th. There are also more than 100 to be arrested soon. There is justice happening for the riot here at the Capitol on January 6th. Republicans and Democrats together are against the violence and the riot that happened here in the Capitol on January 6th. But the problem lies with this. Republicans and Democrats are not together on the violence that's happened to the people all over this country throughout the past year. And that's why Congress is only concerned with itself and not about the American people. Rioters did a horrific and jaw-dropping amount of damage to cities across America. During 2020, there was up to $2 billion in damage due to the riots that swept the nation, the most expensive in insurance history. By the way, that's not a $2 billion bailout fund coming from the government. That's not a taxpayer-funded check. That's private money. That's private money that insurance companies are having to pay because domestic terrorists rioted. The damage done to federal buildings has been incredibly costly. BLM rioters in Nashville set a federal courthouse on fire. The destruction is estimated to have cost $1.2 million in damages. This is a federal courthouse. Why were those involved attacking and setting fire to this federal courthouse not called insurrectionists? It's a question that needs to be asked. Rioters in Portland destroyed barriers and attempted to burn down government buildings, causing $1.6 million in damage to the federal courthouse downtown. See? Why is this not called an insurrection? And again, why is Congress not concerned with creating a commission for this type of damage and the people that caused this attack? In Guilford County, North Carolina, a courthouse was broken into and set on fire, resulting in roughly $200,000 in damages. Again, it's a courthouse. Why is that not called an insurrection? And there's not a government bailout and a commission in place to investigate these things. Los Angeles, Oakland, Louisville, and Dakota City also had damage to federal buildings. These cities are not being named. Members of Congress are not demanding a commission to investigate the damages happening to the federal buildings in these cities. No one is being called insurrectionist for the damage that is done to these federal buildings. As a matter of fact, most of the time, if you watch the news, they're called peaceful protesters. These are not peaceful protests. These are violent domestic acts of terror. And this is exactly how they should be viewed, and this is how they should be handled. The looting, burning, and destruction across America has cost cities millions and millions of dollars. Riots caused an estimated $55 million in damages in Minneapolis alone. Minneapolis city officials estimate 700 buildings were damaged, burned, or destroyed, including, in one estimation, 360 local businesses. But I have an article right here that contains a list of 1,500 businesses that were damaged or destroyed. 1,500 businesses. By the way, it's these businesses and these business owners that pay the taxes that fund everything that we do here. These people should matter. Their businesses should matter. Why is there not a commission investigating this? Why doesn't Congress care about these people and their businesses? Rioters in Portland set up an autonomous zone and ultimately cost the city $2.3 million in damages. An autonomous zone? What is an autonomous zone? And how can people take over part of a city, an American city, and say that it is theirs and that they control it and that no government authority can come in and enforce law and order in this part of the city? But yet this is what happened with peaceful protesters in Portland. They created an autonomous zone, costing the taxpayers of Portland $2.3 million in damages. Again, that was not a bailout fund. Those are people's actual dollars, private citizens' dollars. Riots in New York are estimated to have cost the city $115 million. One Friday night alone cost the city $100,000 and resulted in the arrest of 150 rioters. That was just in one night. The arrest of 150 rioters. It's unbelievable. Riots in Salt Lake City cost at least $100,000 in damages. Riots in Wichita, Kansas cost the police department nearly $1.5 million in overtime because they had to work. They had to show up for another shift when they were exhausted from working the shift before. So they had to be paid overtime because they were overrun with rioters. Riots in Denver cost the city at least $5.5 million in damages and overtime. This is unbelievable when there are Antifa BLM rioters, domestic terrorists, causing so much violence and damage in a city that these cities and police departments are having to call their police officers back in after working their shift, their long hours. No, I'm sorry, you can't go home to your family. I'm sorry, you can't go home and do things that you need to do in your regular life. We need you to come in. We need you to come back and work overtime because our city is overrun with violence. But yet here, the United States Congress, the 117th Congress, has no interest in launching a commission to investigate, to stop these incredibly organized and well-funded organizations of terror across the American cities and the country that is causing private citizens, businesses, insurance companies, cities, counties, and states so much money that all comes from American citizens and taxpayers. You know, money is not created right here in Congress. This is not a facility, this is not an institution that creates revenue. The only revenue that Congress operates on is the American people's tax dollars that they have to pay right here to the federal government. Congress needs to learn to put the people first and not itself. Riots in Baltimore cost the city an estimated $26 million. Again, taxpayer dollars, private citizens' dollars. Riots in Kansas City resulted in $2.1 million in damages, mostly over the course of just one weekend. That's some kind of party, isn't it? Where Antifa and BLM terrorists can go out and just riot in violence and rage in one weekend, costing a city $2.1 million. Rioters in Kenosha, Wisconsin, injured police officers set off fireworks near the police and courthouse and set at least 2 city trucks on fire. Altogether, the destruction cost the cities $50 million. Does anyone understand what $50 million is? That's an exorbitant amount of money in damages for people that were angry and think that it's okay to riot and destroy other people's property, other people's businesses, and tear down a community. There's no excuse for that. Here we have California closed down all of its state's buildings in downtown areas, saying staff should not report to work for any reason. That sounds like some kind of third world country where you have California closing down all of its state buildings in downtown areas, saying that your staff should not report to work for any reason. Why? Because it's too dangerous for you? But yet this Congress is so concerned with spending an unknown amount of money on a January 6th commission when there's already multiple investigations underway. There's already been 445 arrests already made, 100 more to take place. But yet this Congress is not concerned about all of the violence and the organizations that caused all of this, to the point where California has to say, don't come to work, it's dangerous. Look at this. It's unreal. This is our country. The police officers who defend Americans paid a great price as well, just like the Capitol police officers here in the Capitol did. The police officers all over the country in American cities, it didn't just happen to them on one day for part of the day. It happened to them night after night, day after day, continuously. In some cities, for a short time, weeks, but in some cities, months and months, and it still continues. The Major Cities Chiefs Association found that between May 25th and July 31st, there were 8,700 protests nationwide. 8,700. How many was there on January 6th? 1. Nearly 600 of those protests were declared riots, with violence and criminal acts, and 2,385 looting incidents were reported. 600 of them were declared violent riots. 2,385 looting incidences. Again, how many times did that happen here at the Capitol? We'll go with 1 riot. But this Congress is more interested in spending an unknown amount of money to investigate 1 riot here, because this Congress seems to only care about itself and not the American people. 3/4 of law enforcement agencies reported officers harmed during the protest. 3/4, guys, 3/4 of law enforcement agencies. Why don't we hear about them over and over on the news? Does no one care about those police officers' lives? Apparently not. This Congress obviously doesn't. More than 624 arsons were reported, and at least 97 police vehicles were burned. That costs a lot of money. Again, do you know whose money that is? The taxpayers' dollars that did nothing wrong to deserve these riots in their cities, and the police officers that did a good job and do a good job every day don't deserve it either, just because of the actions of a few bad apples. The MCAA reported that over 2,000 law enforcement officers were injured in these 9 weeks alone. This is why I introduced H.R. 2446 to award police all over the country who defended American cities. They deserve medals. They deserve medals because no one is acknowledging what they have gone through night after night, day after day, with what CNN calls peaceful protest. I don't think so. Meanwhile, BLM and Antifa domestic terrorists are bailed out and supported by our now Vice President Kamala Harris. George Floyd died on May 25th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. As you see here, on June 1st, we have then Senator Kamala Harris and then Vice Presidential candidate for the United States tweeting a link to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, encouraging people, if you're able, chip in now. Chip in now. Spend some more money to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. But yet we know what was going on. These were not protests. These were violent riots. I'm sorry, you can't stand in front of a city on fire and people fighting and say, it's a protest. It's a riot, and it's not peaceful. In fact, Kamala Harris and, unfortunately, my own colleague from Minneapolis, Ilhan Omar, have shared links to the Minnesota Freedom Fund with their millions of Twitter followers. And you know what? It raised a lot of money for the Minnesota Freedom Fund. In August, the Minnesota Freedom Fund reported that it had raised $35 million in donations. Yes, when the Democrat candidate for the Vice President of the United States says donate to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, people donated. When the Congresswoman from Minneapolis, Minnesota, shared on her Twitter to millions of followers and said, pointed down, meaning follow suit, donate, guess what? They raised $35 million. And guess what happened from that? As a result of all the money raised by then Senator Kamala Harris and then the Democrat Vice President candidate of the United States, now our current Vice President, and current Congresswoman from Minneapolis, Minnesota, 184 domestic terrorist criminals that rioted, 184 of them were bailed out from the Minnesota Freedom Fund. The criminals they helped bail out include a woman who shot at the SWAT team, another woman who was accused of killing her own friend, and a convicted rapist. That's just a few of the people that were bailed out with the money raised directly for the Minnesota Freedom Fund by then Senator Kamala Harris and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, shared on their own Twitter pages. Can you imagine if a Republican Congresswoman or Congressman or a Republican senator or a Republican president shared a bail bond link and said bail out the protesters from January 6th? Can you imagine the result of that? It would be unreal. There has been no lashback. There has been no consequences. There has been no action taken from this irresponsibility, supporting domestic terrorists who are responsible for violence, crime, and costing the innocent American people an exorbitant amount of money, stress, ruining communities, ruining people's livelihoods, and tearing apart our country. No accountability whatsoever. The criminals, these Democrat lawmakers have also voted for defunding police departments across the country. So while they also raise money for domestic terrorists committing crimes to be bailed out of jail, at the same time, they legislate and vote to defund police. H.R. 1280 that they voted for and passed removed qualified immunity. That means police officers can be sued if someone is upset with them for their actions on the job. Police officers don't make a lot of money. They can't afford big attorney bills. It will ruin them. Just because someone may get their feelings hurt because they got arrested. H.R. 1280 also will allow police officers to be put on a list. That means whether it is proven or unproven, someone can accuse a police officer of doing some sort of wrong, and their name and information gets put on a public list that the Department of Justice will manage on a website that's open to anyone that wants to look it up. Founded or unfounded, their actions, no matter it's true or not, their name goes on this list and what they're being accused of. This is what these people voted for to do to police officers and remove a lot of their funding. After the LAPD was defunded by $150 million, Vice President Harris said, "I applaud Eric Garcetti for doing what he's done." As a result of the funding cuts, the LAPD dissolved its sexual assault unit. Defunding the LAPD where they have to get rid of the sexual assault unit? That's unbelievable. That means women, children, any victim of sexual assault, I'm sorry, there's not a unit there anymore to help them because they've been defunded. As a result of this defunding, that Vice President Harris applauds Eric Garcetti for doing what he's done, there has been a 73% spike in shootings in LA. 73%. When you defund the police, ladies and gentlemen, there's direct consequences. That means crime goes up. There's also been a 200% higher murder rate than last year at the same time. 200%. If you don't fund law enforcement, you're funding criminals. And clearly, we can see this is what some of these Democrat lawmakers have done. They have clearly funded criminals and defunded the police. Back to Minneapolis and the riots there. Notice that this date, 11/4/20, that's not too long ago. Encouraging donations. See, there's no excuse for that. November 4th, 2020. By that date, we had seen plenty of violence and damage all over the streets. There was no way to call those riots peaceful protest. We know exactly what they are. Domestic acts of terror. In Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's district, 700 buildings were damaged, burned, or destroyed. Who owns those buildings? Mostly private citizens. 1,500 businesses. Here's the list. It's reported from the Star Tribune from Minneapolis for the Twin Cities. 1,500 privately owned businesses, heavily damaged, 2 destroyed, mostly completely destroyed. So the problem with Congress is Congress does not get up early every single day, go into its business, and have to earn the money that keeps it going. Congress does not have to work so hard, lose sleep at night to figure out how to earn the money to keep the doors open to their business. Congress does not have to lose sleep at night when things get rough, like when the government shuts down the economy because of a Chinese virus and tells businesses that they cannot keep their doors open and sell their goods and services, that they cannot earn a living, you see, Congress doesn't understand how hard it is to figure out how to keep paying your employees when that happens to you. And Congress doesn't understand or seem to care about doing a commission for the people that pay the taxes to keep the lights on in this building, to care about them and why they were violently attacked. No, Congress only cares about itself and why it was attacked on January 6th, even though there's multiple investigations going on, even though there's been 445 people arrested and 100 people more arrested, and justice should be served for those that committed violence here at the Capitol on January 6th, but Congress doesn't care about the American people that have suffered this entire year, and it's despicable. The human cost of a year of riots and violence is 25 American lives lost. That's been estimated. 25 Americans are dead as a direct result of BLM and Antifa terrorism that swept our nation. I'll go ahead and tell you about one. This little girl, her name is Sequoia Turner. Sequoia Turner was killed at a Wendy's in Atlanta because there were riots going on. Sequoia Turner's mother was pulling in the Wendy's, turning around, trying to go the right way, when gunshots were fired that took Sequoia Turner's life. She was 8 years old. This little girl was 8 years old and was murdered during a riot. There's not a commission being launched in here for her life. There's also not a commission being launched for the life of David Dorn, a great man, a retired police officer who was murdered during domestic terrorist BLM riots. Why does Congress not care about David Dorn? Why does Congress not care about Sequoia Turner? Despite all of this damage, there is no investigation into domestic terrorism from Congress. We have no commission launched to investigate the funding of Antifa. There's no investigation into the funding of BLM. There is no commission set forward for the past year of violent riots. But all they care about is a commission for the one riot here on January 6th. The accused on January 6th they've been abused behind bars. They've been denied due process rights. They are still being held in jail. Michael Sherwin, an attorney for D.C., bragged that they had rounded up 400 people who participated in the breach of the Capitol on January 6th. He said he wanted to charge as many people as possible. What kind of justice system do we have if officials are eager to charge as many people as possible, but they don't care about Antifa domestic terrorists, and they don't care about the people in those riots? The Biden administration has taken investigators who typically work on cases involving drug trafficking, child pornography, and assigned them to calling relatives and even ex-girlfriends of the January 6th accused in an attempt to find them guilty. Please put them back on drug trafficking and child pornography. These departments are being defunded anyways. One person accused faces 7 years in prison for walking through the open doors of the Capitol, taking photos in the hallway, and leaving without doing any harm. Even the mainstream media outlets have reported on D.C. jail guards cruelly beating Trump supporters. One man was beaten so badly he has a skull fracture and is now blind in one eye. You don't hardly hear anything about that on the news. Months after January 6th, men and women are still being held in jail, and they haven't seen their day in court. Justice should be served for January 6th, but this Congress needs to care about the people of the United States who have not seen justice for the riots of the past year. This Congress is failing the American people. Not only are we a nation nearly in $30 trillion in debt, but we have a Congress that could care less about law and order in the United States. I yield the remainder of my time.